There are parts of every cruise ship you will never see. Not because they are dangerous, not because they are off limits for a complicated legal reason, but simply because the cruise lines have never had a reason to show you. Below the waterline, behind the service doors, past the swipe card corridors, the crew disappears into every night. There is an entirely different ship running underneath the one you paid for. And after more than 2 decades of cruising, asking questions, talking to crew members at the end of long shifts, and paying close attention to things most passengers walk right past, I have a pretty clear picture of what goes on back there. Welcome back. If you've been cruising for years, maybe decades, you'll want to hear this one. I've sailed most of the major lines, and I can tell you there is nothing quite like understanding the machine behind the magic. Today, I'm pulling back the curtain on the crew-only areas of a cruise ship, the places no passenger ever visits. What happens there, why it matters to you as a guest, and a few things I've picked up along the way that changed how I think about the ships I sail on. We are going to start with the parts you've probably heard whispered about the crew deck, the crew mess, and then move steadily toward the ones almost nobody talks about. The mechanical spaces, the medical levels, the areas that exist purely to keep you comfortable without you ever knowing they are there. And I'll tell you right now, there is one area in particular, somewhere in the middle of this video, that genuinely surprised me when I learned what actually happens inside it. Stay with me for that one. If this kind of deep dive is useful to you, tap the thumbs up, it really does help the channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. Let's get into it. Number 1, the crew corridor system, sometimes called I-95. Almost every large cruise ship has a long, low-ceilinged corridor that runs the length of the vessel on one of the lower decks, usually somewhere between Deck 1 and Deck 3, well below the passenger areas. Crew call it I-95, after the American Interstate Highway, because it goes on and people are always moving through it fast. This is the main artery of the ship. Housekeeping staff, wait staff, kitchen workers, entertainers, engineers, they all use this corridor to get from one end of the ship to the other without ever crossing the passenger areas. Why does this matter to you? Because it explains something you have probably noticed without fully understanding. Service on a large ship seems to materialize out of nowhere. Your cabin steward appears exactly when you need something. The waiter who was at one end of the dining room is somehow at the other end 2 minutes later. That is not magic. That is I-95. The crew is moving constantly through a parallel ship you cannot see. The corridor is functional, not comfortable. Fluorescent lighting, bare walls, narrow passages. The contrast with the atrium 2 decks above is extreme. I've spoken to crew members on several lines who describe the psychological adjustment of stepping from I-95 into the passenger areas as something they never quite stop noticing, even after years at sea. Number 2, the crew mess hall and crew-only dining areas. Crew members do not eat in the ship's restaurants. They have their own mess, usually 1 or 2 dining rooms on the lower crew decks, open around the clock to accommodate the rotating shift schedules. On larger ships with international crews, the mess will often offer multiple cuisine options because the crew itself comes from dozens of countries. Royal Caribbean, for example, frequently employs crew from the Philippines, India, Indonesia, Eastern Europe, and across the Caribbean on a single vessel, and the galley team tries to reflect that. The food is functional and calorie-dense because crew work physical, demanding shifts. It is not the specialty dining you are eating upstairs. But I've heard from enough crew members over the years to know that the quality varies dramatically by line. Some lines are known among crew for taking care of their people at the table, others, less so. Here is the honest truth about why this matters to you. Crew morale is directly connected to service quality. A crew that feels looked after is more likely to look after you. The lines that invest in crew welfare, and that includes how they feed and house their staff, tend to show it in the service experience. Holland America and Celebrity Cruises have long had reputations, at least among crew, for being reasonably decent employers. That is worth knowing when you choose a line. Now, there is something I want to mention here, because we have covered quite a bit of ground already: the hidden corridor system, the crew dining culture, what it tells you about service quality across different lines. And if you want to go deeper on all of this, the crew culture, the insider knowledge about which lines treat their people best, plus the practical tips around cabin selection, boarding day strategy, and the fees that actually matter, that is exactly what the Season Cruisers Complete Pack covers. It is the reference I wish I had put together years ago, and it goes well beyond what any single video can cover. The link is in the description, or you can scan the code on your screen right now. And speaking of things that exist entirely out of passenger sight, what I'm about to tell you next about the area directly responsible for everything you eat and drink on board is something most cruisers have never once thought about. Number 3, the main galley, the real one. When most people think of the ship's kitchen, they picture something like a restaurant kitchen. Bigger, maybe, but roughly similar. The reality is nothing like that. The main galley on a large cruise ship is an industrial operation running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for a floating city of anywhere from 2,000 to 7,000 people depending on the ship. On a ship like Royal Caribbean's Wonder of the Seas, the galley team might produce close to 20,000 individual meals every single day. The equipment is purpose-built for marine environments. Everything is bolted down, designed to function in rough seas, with redundant systems in case of failure. The galley is typically spread across multiple levels, with separate sections for hot cooking, cold prep, pastry, crew feeding, and specialty restaurant support. What most passengers do not realize is how much of what you eat is prepared well in advance and held at precise temperatures. The logistical planning required to feed that many people, across that many dining venues, in the middle of an ocean, is genuinely extraordinary. The executive chef on a large ship is running a food operation more complex than most major hotel chains. Have you ever thought about what happens in those galleys, or is this the first time you've considered the scale of it? I'd love to know what surprises you most. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Number 4, the laundry operation. This one flies completely under the radar, and it is enormous. A large cruise ship generates tens of thousands of pounds of laundry every single day. Sheets, towels, tablecloths, uniforms, napkins, robes. The volume is staggering. The ship's laundry facility is typically located on one of the lowest crew decks, and it runs continuously. Industrial washing machines, dryers, pressing equipment, folding systems. The operation is closer to a commercial laundry factory than anything residential. Why does this matter to you? 2 reasons. First, it is a reminder of the sheer logistical scale of a ship and why the cost of a cruise, even when it feels expensive, reflects a genuinely complex operation. Second, and more practically, it explains the turnaround time on your linen. When your towels are replaced and your sheets are fresh, that is not happening in some small closet on your deck. That is a 24-hour industrial operation several decks below your feet. Some lines have started offering passenger laundry services using this same facility, self-service laundromats or full-service laundering, and for longer voyages, especially for those of us traveling for 10, 14, or 21 days, this is worth knowing about. Princess Cruises, Holland America, and Cunard in particular tend to offer reasonable laundry access for guests. On shorter sailings, it matters less. On a longer voyage, it matters quite a bit. Number 5, the crew cabins. Here is something that genuinely recalibrates how you see a cruise ship. Crew cabins on most mainstream cruise lines are small, very small. We're talking about shared rooms, often 2 to 4 people with bunk beds, a single small porthole if they are lucky, and not much else. The cabins are typically on decks 1, 2, or 3, well below the waterline, meaning no natural light for many of the crew who live in them for contracts of 4 to 9 months at a stretch. This is not a secret. The cruise lines are hiding. It is simply the economic and spatial reality of fitting a working crew of 1,000 to 2,000 people onto a vessel that is also housing 3 to 5,000 paying guests. Space is at an absolute premium below the passenger decks. I mention this not to make anyone feel guilty for enjoying a cruise. That would be missing the point entirely. I mention it because it builds a kind of respect for the people serving you. When your cabin steward has turned around your room in 20 minutes while managing a corridor of 20 or more cabins, and they have done it with a smile after sleeping in a bunk room with 3 other people, that context matters. It changes how you interact with them. And in my experience, the cruisers who treat crew like people who learn names, say good morning properly, acknowledge the work, have a noticeably better experience on board. That is not a coincidence. Number 6, the crew recreation areas. This is one most passengers never think about. Crew members, when they are off shift, have their own version of the ship's amenities. On well-run ships, there is a crew bar separate from passenger bars where staff can socialize without crossing into guest areas. There is often a small gym, sometimes a crew-only deck or outdoor space, and a lounge or common room with television access. The quality of these spaces varies enormously by line. This is actually one of the clearer indicators of how a cruise line thinks about its crew. Lines that invest in crew recreation, that give their people somewhere comfortable to decompress between 12-hour shifts, tend to attract and retain better staff. Lines that treat the crew quarters as an afterthought tend to have higher turnover, and higher turnover shows up in service inconsistency. Norwegian Cruise Line and Celebrity Cruises have received relatively positive marks from crew in terms of onboard living conditions in recent years. This is the kind of thing that does not appear in any marketing brochure, but it shapes the experience you actually have on board. Number 7, the engine room and technical spaces. Now we go even deeper. The engine room of a large cruise ship is the size of a multi-story building. On a ship like Carnival's Mardi Gras, the propulsion system is a series of massive diesel-electric engines paired with an azipod system rotating pod thrusters mounted under the hull that give the ship extraordinary maneuverability without a traditional rudder. The engine room is staffed around the clock by a team of marine engineers who most passengers will never see or interact with. The temperature in parts of the engine room can reach well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The noise level without hearing protection is genuinely dangerous. It is, in every sense, the opposite of the atrium bar 3 decks above. This is also where the ship's electrical generation happens, and a modern cruise ship generates enormous amounts of electricity. The power required to run the HVAC systems, the kitchens, the entertainment systems, the elevators, the navigation equipment, and the propulsion on a large vessel is roughly equivalent to a small city. The marine engineers managing those systems are highly qualified professionals, often with sea time measured in decades. Number 8. The medical center. This is the one I want to make sure you hear clearly, because it affects you directly in a way the engine room does not. Every cruise ship is required by maritime law to have a medical facility on board. On larger ships, this is a real clinic, not just a first aid station. It will typically include examination rooms, an intensive care area, basic surgical capability, X-ray equipment, and a dispensary. The team usually consists of at least one doctor and 2 or more registered nurses on larger vessels. The doctor is typically a licensed physician, often with emergency medicine or general practice training. Here is what most people do not know. The medical center on a cruise ship is a private facility. It is not covered by your standard health insurance, and it is emphatically not free. A visit to the ship's doctor can run anywhere from around $100 to $300 or more before any treatment, medication, or tests. If you need more serious intervention, the costs escalate quickly. This is why travel insurance with medical coverage is not optional, it is essential. I have seen this catch people out more times than I can count. Travelers who assumed their domestic health plan covered them at sea, or travelers who skipped trip insurance to save a few $100s and then faced a medical bill on board that ran into the thousands. For those of us over 60 with existing conditions and medications to manage, the stakes are higher. Check with your doctor before any voyage about what you need on board. And sort your travel insurance before you leave the dock, not after. Have you ever had to visit the medical center on a ship? It is more common than people admit. Tell me in the comments. I think a lot of cruisers reading this would benefit from hearing honest experiences. Number 9. The navigation bridge. The bridge is technically a restricted area, though some cruise lines offer bridge tours on select sailings, usually on sea days, and usually limited to a small group. Holland America and Cunard have historically been more open to this than some of the larger party-oriented lines. If you ever get the chance, take it. The working bridge of a modern cruise ship is a remarkable space. It typically spans the full width of the vessel at the forward section of the upper decks, with floor-to-ceiling windows, and it is where the captain and senior navigation officers manage everything from course plotting to weather routing to port arrival sequencing. The technology in a modern bridge, ECDIS navigation systems, AIS transponders, dynamic positioning systems, radar arrays represents decades of maritime engineering development. The captain of a large cruise ship is managing a vessel that may be carrying 6,000 souls, worth over $1 billion, navigating into port approaches where the margin for error is measured in meters. The senior officers on that bridge are among the most qualified maritime professionals in the world. Most passengers think of the captain as a figurehead who makes speeches at dinner. The reality is considerably more demanding than that. Number 10. The crew training and safety areas. This is one almost nobody thinks about, and it matters more than most passengers realize. Cruise ships are legally required to conduct regular safety drills, not just the muster drill you participate in as a passenger, but ongoing crew training for fire response, flooding, man overboard situations, and evacuation procedures. There are dedicated training spaces on many large ships, as well as regular drills conducted when the ship is at sea. The crew members you see in bright orange vests at the lifeboat stations during your muster drill are not just pointing at things. They are trained personnel who have rehearsed those procedures repeatedly. On a ship sailing out of a U.S. port, the Coast Guard has oversight requirements that the lines take seriously, not because they are naturally altruistic, but because the regulatory and reputational consequences of a safety failure are catastrophic. This is worth knowing because it changes how you should think about the muster drill. I know it feels like a formality. I know it is the last thing you want to do when you have just boarded and you are trying to get a drink and find the pool, but the people conducting that drill have trained for it, and the procedures behind it are real. Pay attention. It takes 10 minutes, and it is the most important 10 minutes of any voyage. Number 11, the water and waste management systems. This one sits squarely in the category of things passengers benefit from every day without any awareness they exist. A large cruise ship carries and manages an extraordinary volume of water. Freshwater is produced on board through desalination systems that process seawater on a large ship, the capacity to produce tens of thousands of gallons of fresh water per day. The water you drink, the water you shower in, the water in the pools, it is produced and monitored on board, not simply loaded in port. The waste management systems are equally significant. Cruise lines operating in international waters and in ecologically sensitive areas like Alaska and the Caribbean are subject to maritime environmental regulations governing how they handle gray water, black water, and solid waste. The systems that manage all of this, the treatment plants, the incinerators, the holding tanks, are running continuously in the lower decks. This is not glamorous, but it is worth knowing that the ship you are on is essentially a self-contained ecosystem, managing its own resources and waste at sea. The lines vary considerably in how seriously they take environmental compliance. If this matters to you, and for a lot of people our age, it does, it is worth researching the environmental records of the lines you sail, not just the cabin categories. Number 12, the cargo and provisions hold. Before every sailing, the ship is loaded with a staggering quantity of provisions. We are talking about thousands of pounds of fresh produce, meat, seafood, dairy, and dry goods. On a 7-day sailing with 3,000 guests, the provisioning operation is the logistical equivalent of stocking a medium-sized supermarket from scratch, with the added constraint that everything has to last the full voyage. The provisions hold is typically in the lowest section of the ship, kept at controlled temperatures. There will be separate sections for frozen goods, refrigerated goods, dry storage, and beverages. The loading of provisions in port, usually happening overnight before embarkation day, is a massive, precisely choreographed operation. Watch the dock on the evening before your cruise begins, if you ever get the chance. The volume of what goes on board is genuinely eye-opening. On a longer voyage, a transatlantic crossing, a world cruise segment, the provisioning challenge becomes even more complex, because resupply opportunities are limited. The logistics team on a ship doing a world voyage is planning months in advance. Number 13, what the crew thinks of the passengers and what I've learned to do differently. This one is a bit different from the others, and I'll be honest, it is the one I think about most. Over more than 20 years of cruising and dozens of conversations with crew members, waitstaff, cabin stewards, bartenders, officers, I have formed a pretty clear picture of what makes the difference between a guest crew members genuinely enjoy looking after and one they are simply professionally tolerating. It is not about tipping more than everyone else, though tipping fairly matters. It is simpler than that. It is about acknowledgement. It is about treating the person in front of you as a person, learning your steward's name on the first day and using it. Saying good morning to the crew member, mopping the corridor at 6 in the morning, not treating the dining room team like they are invisible. None of this is revolutionary. Most of us were raised to behave this way. But in the bubble of a cruise where so much feels automatic and frictionless, it is easy to drift into a mode where you stop seeing the people behind the service. Here is what I've found, consistently, across multiple lines and dozens of sailings. When you show up as someone who sees the crew, the experience is different. Not because you get special treatment, that is not the point, but because the interaction changes in quality. It is richer, it feels less transactional, and that changes how the cruise feels overall. This last item is the one I've never stopped thinking about. Because when you understand the ship beneath the ship, the I-95 corridor, the 12-hour shifts, the bunk room 2 decks below the waterline, the crew mess and the crew bar and the industrial laundry running at 3 in the morning, the people you meet in the passenger spaces stop being part of the scenery. They become people. And that, in my honest opinion, is the most valuable thing you can take away from knowing what goes on in the crew-only areas of a cruise ship. If you sail on a major line and you've ever caught a glimpse of what goes on behind those service doors, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. You might be the most interesting thing someone reads today. Now, if this kind of inside knowledge approach to cruising is something you want more of, I have a lot more coming. Next time I'm covering the things experienced, cruisers always do in the first hour on board, and a few of them will genuinely surprise you. So subscribe if you don't want to miss it. If this video earned it, hit the thumbs up. It takes 1 second and it makes a real difference. Until the next port, take care of yourself.